We are living in an age of acceleration. And like a lot of people, I'm still trying to figure out what I want my relationship to technology to look like.
And it is really difficult to know where things are going to be in 2 years, let alone 5 years or a generation from now. So I am trying to dive in with both feet to do things that make me uncomfortable to make sure that I'm not missing the boat on some of these important technologies like AI.
Vance Crowe is a thinker and communicator that I really respect, and as usual, he offers some clarifying perspective on how to use technology to improve our lives.
I probably spend 2 times the amount of time with AI than I do with social media at this point.
He also has a really interesting point of view about Bitcoin, including that it will demonetize farmland at some point in the future.
And as more and more people realize, wait a second, I can get the value that you get from land, it's scarce, but I don't have to pay all these other fees, then they're going to start holding their value in Bitcoin, and it will make the price of land return to its utility value. How much is the land worth? Well, it's worth however much you can produce on it or whatever people want to do for recreation.
Technology acceleration and living on the edge of chaos with Vance Crowe on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hammerich, and if you're interested in where innovative ideas meet practical realities in agriculture, I think you found the right show. Way back in 2016, 9+ years ago, at an Alpha Gamma Rho leadership seminar, I got to hear today's guest give a speech for the first time. Back then, he was the director of millennial engagement at Monsanto, and he gave an exceptional keynote at the event. I remember thinking, man, they for sure found the right guy for that job. But since that time, so the last 9 years, I've followed him on social media. We've bumped into each other at some events. We've caught up over the phone a few times. He truly is an independent thinker. You are likely to disagree with part of this episode, and I think that's great. But there's no question he's smart, he's provocative, and he's compelling. And he always seems to be right on the leading edge of new ideas, at least new ideas to me, and new technologies. So bringing Vance Crowe back onto the show is long overdue. And I say bringing him back because he was actually one of the first podcast guests on this show, back when I still called it the AgGrad podcast, when I was brand new figuring this thing out back in 2016. I've since archived those old AgGrad episodes, which I think were the first maybe 20 or so that I did. But here we are, 9 years later, and a lot has changed. Vance and I today discuss his views on reinvention, artificial intelligence, how to develop healthy habits and relationships with technology in general, and Bitcoin, specifically why he believes it will demonetize farmland as just one of the implications of more widespread adoption of that technology. And if you've ever thought, I don't really understand Bitcoin, and frankly, it feels too late to ask, this is probably going to be a good episode for you because I asked some really fundamental questions. And I'm not saying you're going to leave here today fully understanding Bitcoin, but I do think Vance offers a really helpful primer, an insight into his perspective, and some practical advice for where you should go if you'd like to explore it further. A quick bio on Vance. Vance Crowe is a communications strategist who has worked for corporations and international organizations all over the world. Vance has spoken before more than 250,000 people, answering questions about some of the most sophisticated and controversial technologies in the modern age. He has worked for organizations such as the World Bank, Monsanto, the U.S. Peace Corps, and even as a deckhand on an ecotourism ship. Today, though, he is the founder of Legacy Interviews, a service that he provides to privately record the life stories of individuals and couples so that future generations can know their family history. The Vance Crowe Podcast hosts guests from around the world with artists, psychologists, economists, farmers, ambassadors, and heads of state. And as you can gather from hearing that bio, he's had to reinvent himself a number of times. And I feel like, to me, we're right now in this age of rapid change. You know, the farm economy is in rough shape, a ton of technological change happening faster and faster and faster, political change, and it could cause some people, and I'm definitely one of them, to think about reinvention, to think, is what I've been doing still the right path? Is it still something I should continue? Or should I be thinking about reinvention in some way? And if so, how? How do I even go about starting that? I'll drop into the conversation here where Vance is talking a little bit about how he thinks about reinvention in this current era of acceleration.
Yeah, what a great question. I mean, my career has spanned from being a deckhand on a ship to the U.S. Peace Corps to renovating a house to working at the World Bank to working at Monsanto to then being a business owner and probably a bunch of things in between there. And I definitely feel that pressure right now, maybe more than any other time in my life, that, I've heard it called the age of acceleration, where it's not just that things are moving fast, it's that every day they move faster. And you have to be asking yourself, both as a man that's trying to provide for his family, but also looking for your children, what should I be doing to prepare them? And it is really difficult to know where things are going to be in 2 years, let alone 5 years or a generation from now. So I am trying to dive in with both feet to do things that make me uncomfortable to make sure that I'm not missing the boat on some of these important technologies like AI.
Yeah. And so what types of things are making you uncomfortable today that you're holding your feet to the fire for?
Well, so right now I record people telling their life stories, and people travel in from all over the United States and Canada, and we sit down in a studio and we talk about their lives and record what happened to them. I also do them online on platforms just like this. And it's very clear to me that it is not going to be very far from now where AI can ask parents or grandparents questions. Right now, it's a little bit stilted. It maybe, doesn't feel normal and comfortable, but it will not be long before a lot of that can be automated. And the price that it will cost a computer to do that versus me recording these and then having a team that edits them, that is certainly going to be a big change. And so then you have to ask yourself, is what I'm doing art? That because of the human element, that spark between two human beings, does that make it special enough that it will be long lasting? Or is this really, like many businesses, turn into a commodity and whoever can drive the price the lowest going to be the one that wins? And I think that it's probably the two things at the same time. I remember starting this business about 5 years ago. The idea that AI would be good enough to be able to hold a conversation was ridiculous. But I recorded a podcast where I had the AI be me, be the podcast host. And it was fantastic. It asked me questions that other hosts don't. And as soon as I did that and I posted it to my podcast, I had to start really asking myself, hey, what's going to happen with things like legacy interviews?
I love the question, is what I'm doing art? It doesn't seem to me to be a question that a lot of us are asking ourselves. You might think whatever you do as the furthest thing from art. But I think in a lot of professions, especially in the knowledge economy, so to speak, all of us need to be asking that question in the age of AI. With acceleration, where I find myself having trouble is, am I falling behind? Am I already a relic versus am I becoming hyper distracted by all of the change? And where in the middle do I go? You mentioned kids, right? What's this look like for my kids? But also, is watching what this looks like for my kids taking me away from my actual kids who are, by the way, downstairs right now? How have you thought about that?
It's one of those things that technology will become so encompassing that even as a vice, it won't feel like a vice. It will feel as though it is helping you. And so the only way that you can have any sort of order is to have a North Star. It's to say, these are the things that I value outside of whatever the technology gives me. Because I know I felt that pull where you're talking with your kids and they ask you a question. And you're like, I don't know the exact specifics of gravity or about why the moon does that thing. Let me just pull out my phone and ask it. And you feel like, oh, I'm giving my child better access to information. But my 4-year-old and my 2-year-old don't actually need that right answer. What they need is the one thing that only I can give them, which is attention. And so it is definitely a pull that I have. And I have to say, like, that I've started doing things to distance myself from technology. So I try and put my phone away. I try and, make it so it's very difficult for me to interact. I have to make a conscious decision to move away from my attention with them to the technology. But that's hard to do. I mean, I think it's probably harder than quitting smoking. just because it feels like it's helping you so much.
Yeah. One of the things that has changed is social media, or at least maybe it feels like to me it's changed. I'm not sure. Maybe my engagement in it has changed more so than the platforms have necessarily changed. But how are you finding social media today, and where are you finding the value in how you use social media today?
Well, where you find the value is a very subjective question, because I definitely have to work very, very hard not to become addicted to the fentanyl that is shorts, right? Which is no different than a slot machine where your brain is like, oh, there might be something interesting here. Oh, there might be some quick thing that gives you a pop or some insight, but you're hitting that button all the time and you're giving it your most valuable thing, which is your attention, your bandwidth for changing the world. That said, X to me has fallen prey to the very technical term in shitification, right? Where as a technology realizes that they need to monetize, they start throttling things, and they make it so you have to pay in order to get improved service, and they keep degrading the value so that you will pay more and more and more. And so I find myself not using X nearly as much as I used to. I use a platform called Nostr, which is a decentralized messaging system that is still very, very in the nascent stages. It's not very well developed, and it doesn't have communities, but it will not fall prey to the enshittification in the same way, because the payment models are going to be different. But I mean, like, I probably spend 2 times the amount of time with AI than I do with social media at this point.
Oh, wow. Is that Noster, Nostr?
It's just like every technology created by coders. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It's Nostr.
Yeah. Well, you said something really interesting there before I asked how you spell it, but the way you said it made me think, oh, we've gone from hanging out with people to hanging out in these social media platforms to hanging out with AI. You said you're spending far more time with AI. What does that look like for you?
So I have several different AI clients that I use. So Claude is the one that my legacy interviews team works on. We have projects, and I use this basically as a bunch of different characters in my business. I have a chief marketing officer, so it has all of my brand guidelines. I've uploaded all of my videos that we've ever made about it. So it knows, hey, this is what a legacy interview commercial looks like. This is what legacy interview sounds like. Then I have an office assistant that basically tracks all of the to-do list items that I have. I've been working on translating a class that I teach into a book. So I have this kind of personal assistant that's just helping me work through what's the next chapter? What do you think of this chapter? So I use one in that professional setting, and that one's Claude by Anthropic. I use Grok a lot just for the general questions, and basically it has completely replaced Google for me. But it also, I use that one for asking it questions about, my daughter last night woke up several times and she had nightmares, but she's 2, so she doesn't actually have the language to describe what's going on there. So I'm asking it, hey, what are ways to handle this? How can I go about this? So, I don't know that I would have ever gone to social media for that, but it's definitely a way faster and more sophisticated answer than whatever Google would have given me. And then I use Chat GPT a little bit. I've kind of stopped it because it was getting expensive, but I use that one for just kind of general research stuff, just to explore.
I really appreciate you indulging me in kind of all these tangents, because this is things I really think about. I think these small businesses like you have, like what I have, where it's very small teams and trying to leverage technology to cover more ground. I think that's there's no reason that shouldn't proliferate. I think in the future, and more people go that route. I'm obviously a big fan of that. I also found myself missing some human connection. And so I found it just like in really local, really in-person, things, coaching sports teams and taking improv classes, and last 3 months, jujitsu classes, and like just wanting kind of in-person interaction. Well, let's talk about Bitcoin. You have been a long time Bitcoin person. I can remember, I don't know if it's still there, but your Twitter profile used to say something about like the Bitcoin meme. It was like, I'm a fan of the Bitcoin meme or something like that. I remember that because I had no idea what the hell that meant. Like, okay, I kind of know Bitcoin. I kind of know what memes. What's the Bitcoin meme? Give us some backstory. When did you become interested in Bitcoin?
Yeah, in 2013, on one of those regular meetups that I had with my group of friends, one of my buddies started telling me about how he had a little computer that he plugged into the wall. He was like, and if I let it run, it just sends me money every so often. And I was like, what? This can't be right. And so we were kind of talking about it. And, I definitely have libertarian leanings of wanting very, very little government intervention. And I had worked at the World Bank just down the street from the Federal Reserve. So I had a pretty strong understanding about how the government, instead of taxing its citizens, just inflates the money. Instead of saying, hey, we want to do this new social program, we're going to tax you more for it. They don't do that. What they do instead is they issue bonds and print money, and then they have the money to do that thing. And the way that they've paid for that is they've taken the value of your savings account, the money that represents the work that you did in the world. And so when Bitcoin came along, I was like, this actually could thwart that. It kind of gives you the same physical ability that, say, something like gold does, where gold isn't quite finite, but it's limited in its supply. You can't just add a whole bunch of it without doing more work. And at the same time, it's digital. And so I started to get a little bit involved in it. And then at the time I was running the communications company, and they really wanted to make a splash. They wanted people to know they were like digital and doing things on the edge. They were a web company. And so I said, okay, well, I've got an idea. You should pay my whole contract for this month in Bitcoin. And so they did. And it made local news and became a very big deal. And then I just held on to that payment. And it became at first a big joke. Everybody in my life, including my father-in-law and everybody that had read about it in St. Louis, would be like, all right, well, when are you going to sell it? It's going to go away. But I held on to it, and over time learned more and more about the system, and have become a very strong proponent that it is the most important technology to have occurred in our lifetime. And while there are many things that the age of acceleration in technology that I think are going to have big drawbacks, Bitcoin is going to be largely and hugely valuable for every citizen of every corner of the world.
And so, and this was in 2013. Bitcoin had been around. My understanding is 2008, somewhere in there.
Yeah. So it had been around for about 5 years, but nobody knew anything about it at all. We were invited to go give talks about it, and people would be like, inflation? What's that? We don't have that problem here. So, people thought I was totally nuts. In fact, when I went to work at Monsanto, I had been hired, and then they ran my stuff through HR, and HR was like, oh, red flag, that guy's involved in Bitcoin, which is for criminals, so we can't hire him. Fortunately for me, the woman that was doing the hiring was like, I don't think that's right. We're going to hire him anyway. But they had actually flagged me to say he can't work here because he's involved in Bitcoin.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So this is a random aside, but I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast before. I was hired by Monsanto straight out of college, and my offer revoked for speeding tickets. Yeah. So I can vouch that they have a very high bar for getting through. So yeah, I had an offer accepted, but I had interned for Seminus, which is a division of Monsanto, and received 2 speeding tickets as I was driving through the Central Valley of California collecting tomato samples. And they said, nope, couldn't hire me. So I was kicked out of there. Not for Bitcoin, but for speeding tickets. But okay, so it'd been around 5 years. Nobody was talking about it. The technology that underpins Bitcoin, right? So is blockchain. We've talked about blockchain before here on the show, but you mentioned kind of in the context of the technological acceleration, the underlying technology hasn't changed and probably won't change, right? Isn't that sort of the what makes this something we can put our trust in is because it won't change?
Well, so it will change, but the way that it changes is quite amazing. So the technology of the blockchain and Bitcoin is all open source. Anyone can take a copy of the Bitcoin system and make an exact copy of it and start running it. But what matters is the miners. How are they accepting payments or transactions between people, and what are called nodes? And if for somebody that's not very familiar with Bitcoin, these terms can become swimming out in the deep water really fast. But what's interesting about a node, and I actually didn't understand Bitcoin really until I understood how a node worked. A node is just like I talked before about the relays for Nostr. A node is just a little system that says, I have a recording of every single transaction in the entire blockchain. And if for example, I want to send money from me to you, If I don't have a node, I have to go to somebody else and say, hey, this is my Bitcoin private key. Would you send that money to Tim for me? But if I have my own node, I don't have to do that. I can say, hey, I'm inputting this private key, which is my secret password, and I want it to go to Tim's public address. And once it gets that, it will say, how much are you willing to pay to make that happen? And that will determine how quickly it happens. And then if I pay enough, I can get in the next block or the next 2 or 3 blocks on the blockchain, but I get to broadcast it out. This is what makes Bitcoin truly profound, because it puts all of the ability for the users to access it, to move money in their own hands. You don't have to go to anybody. There's nobody that can block it. Now, the code that's underlying it, that sets up that node, I can change it. And there are changes being made all the time to that code to say, what are the really specific rules? How do you handle these questions that have come up if we've used Bitcoin for longer and longer? So that anybody can change their code, but if you go out of sync with all the other nodes, then you can no longer operate with it. So if more than 50% of the nodes want to do a change, then they can, but it's in everybody's interest to make sure they only make changes that benefit the system as a whole. So it can change, but it's only can change if the node operators, people like me or anybody else that has one at their house, decide they want to make that change.
And so if today I go out and I open a Coinbase account and I buy Bitcoin, I don't have to pay the $100,000 plus that Bitcoin is worth today. I can buy, some fraction of a Bitcoin. Is it called a Satoshi? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, called a Satoshi. So if I do that, am I operating in Coinbase's node, or do I actually have my own node because I'm a Bitcoin holder?
Great question. So we will break this down into all the different parts. Coinbase is an exchange. That's where you go and you say, I've got US dollars and I'm going to give you those US dollars and I want you to go out and buy Bitcoin for me. While your money is sitting at Coinbase, it operates just like a bank account. And if Coinbase decides like, nah, we don't really want to give you those Bitcoin, they don't have to. There's nothing you can do to force them to give it to you. So what you need instead is a wallet. And a wallet, it contains a public address, which is like your email address, and then a private key. So if you go to Coinbase and you say, hey, I want my Bitcoin now that I bought from you, I bought $100 worth. Now I'm going to send it to that wallet. Then they're going to charge a small fee to move it. And it's going to go to that public address. And now if I want to send that Bitcoin from me to you, I need that private key to send it from me to you. Now, the node factors in only if I don't want to have to trust anybody else. You don't need a node to have a wallet. You only need a node if you've become sophisticated enough to say, hey, I want every transaction that I make not to go and ask for permission, but I want to be able to do it on my own. And so the more important thing, if you're going out to buy Bitcoin at Coinbase, is to get a wallet and to get that Bitcoin off of the exchange and onto a wallet. The node, that's a step further.
Okay. Yeah, that's the next level. But you hear about security concerns with like people having Bitcoin years later not being able to find their, whatever what is it, a key or what is it?
Yeah, their private key, like the guy that had a USB stick or a computer and he threw it away and it's in a dumpster somewhere. Or if you lose that private key, you may have the computer sitting right in front of you, but you can't move it. And so you don't have access to it. And so Bitcoin, the very core of it, is very libertarian philosophy, is that what you get from having all of this security is an increased amount of responsibility. Your Bank of America password, if you forget it, you can jump through a couple of hoops and they're going to give it back to you because there's somebody there that actually controls that money. Now, the trade-off you're making there is if for some reason Bank of America decides, Tim, he had too many speeding tickets or we don't like what he's doing, they could potentially say, we're not going to give you your money, or we're only going to give it to you in small amounts. So you're making a trade-off there, and it just depends on what's important to you.
Sure. The concern I've always had about Bitcoin is what makes it go up seems to be just more people thinking it will go up. And now you can say that about a lot of things, right? Like that's sort of how markets work. However, as something like an inflation hedge, in short periods of time, when we've seen inflation spikes in recent years, at the same time, Bitcoin didn't necessarily go up. I mean, it did over time. But, if you were to take 6-month periods of time, let's say, where inflation spiked, Bitcoin at times has gone down by significant amounts. So to me, talking to myself, it's like, okay, I have to really believe in this for long term. And I have to be, okay with betting money on the fact that I just think other people will believe in it as well. So poke holes in that. Like what big part of this am I missing here?
Well, I think the concept of like scarcity is hard for people to wrap their minds around, because you can feel a dollar bill, right? You can get a stack of $100 bills and you're gonna be like, I know that I can spend a lot with this. And when you're talking about Bitcoin, it's like numbers on a computer screen. And so it doesn't feel like it's finite. But that is actually the innovation that is maybe what makes it one of the true wonders of the world. It is digital scarcity. So digital scarcity, like if you think about your cell phone, you can take a photograph of your kids and you could make 1 million copies of that photograph and it would cost you almost nothing, just a marginal amount of electricity to make that happen. And that's because almost everything that's digital can be replicated infinitely. It doesn't cost anything. So with Bitcoin, what the real innovation was, how can you make something digital that can't be replicated? And that's what all of the Bitcoin code is about, and the nodes and the mining. And we won't go into those details, but let's just assume for a moment that there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. If you accept that, and then we compare it with the US dollar, no one on earth knows how many US dollars there are. And I don't mean this in like an abstract sense. I mean, literally nobody knows. We have printed so many that if you go to ask them, they'll be like, we think it's like 3 trillion, but we don't really know. And some of those dollars are in other countries and some of them are in banks. And then on top of that, we have what's called a fractional reserve banking system. So for people that don't know about this, a simple way to understand it is if I go to the bank and I take out a loan, or let's say you put $1,000 into that bank account, you want to have them store it for you. That bank, people are going to come to them and they're going to say, hey, bank, I want to borrow some money. And what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, Vance, you want to borrow $900? Well, we're going to take $900 and we're going to put that in your account. And so now you think you have $1,000 and I think I have $900. Together, that's $1,900. But I'm not going to spend all that money right away. So I'm going to put that money back into a bank account and they're going to then go take, let's say 90% of it and loan that out. So just for simple sake, let's say the next person takes out a loan for $750. So now the bank, without actually printing money, has told you have 1,000, me, I have 900, and that other person over there has $750. Because of this, that is what's called M2 money, which means every time the US puts money into the system, they print dollars. Not only are they printing those dollars, but then those dollars get loaned out again and again and again. And so the amount of US dollars is truly astronomical, which is why you can buy so much less with $100 today than you could 5 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It's truly the value of the dollar has always and will continue to go down. Whereas this is not true of Bitcoin. There will only ever be 21 million of them. So as more people desire them, there is no more supply or very little more supply that's coming online. And so there's more people competing over a finite amount of goods.
Right. And is it true that Satoshi, whether that's a person or an entity, still holds a lot of Bitcoin?
Yeah. So when Bitcoin came about, they call it the Immaculate Conception, because when he first put the system out, he wrote a white paper saying, hey, I think I figured out digital scarcity. It was about a concept called the Byzantine generals problem, which isn't really worth talking too much about, but it's a complicated question about scarcity. How do you know that you and I aren't spending the same Bitcoin at the same time? When he did that, he said, I'm going to start running this protocol. Anybody that wants to have their computer use excess compute. Remember, I told you my buddy said he plugged in a computer and it just sent him money. Well, they were saying, hey, if you have a little bit of extra compute power on your computer, you can just have it mine Bitcoin. As they did this, Satoshi created a wallet and it collected, I think, about 1.2 million Bitcoin. There's only ever going to be 21 million. So this is a significant amount. And ever since they started collecting Bitcoin in that account, they've never moved. Now, a funny thing happened over the weekend. Over the weekend, there were 8 accounts that were all the way back from like 2009 that had not moved any money. It was worth billions of dollars, over $9 billion. And somebody moved 8 of those wallets that had never been used, not Satoshi's, that one's still solid and hasn't moved any, and moved them all to some other account. And nobody knows Why? Because you don't know who owns it. You don't know why they're doing what they're doing. But there's definitely people watching these wallets that are old school that first got into Bitcoin to say, what are they doing? They got Bitcoin when it was worth, less than a penny per Bitcoin. And now they're moving it. It's worth billions of dollars.
Wow. That's interesting. Over the weekend, boy, that's breaking news here. You had tweeted out, and this is part of what led to this interview here, Bitcoin will demonetize ag land. The context here is that someone had asked you, what's one thing you believe that no one else agrees with you on? I think that's the Peter Thiel paradox, as they called it. And your answer was Bitcoin will demonetize ag land. I think that is a very provocative statement. I'm really curious if you could, in the context of this Bitcoin conversation, now that we have some fundamental grasp of what we're talking about, explain what makes you say that.
So I think the only analog to Bitcoin is land, because you're not making any more of it. And so because land is finite, it's the only thing that's like Bitcoin. Gold is not even like that. So gold inflates about 2.5% per year. And if the price of gold goes up, then what that means is people go out and buy more steam shovels and more trucks, and they go mine more of it out of the ground. And so over time, over about 30 years, the value of your gold will go down by about 50%. Land doesn't do that, right? So far, we have found that people say, hey, I've got a bunch of money. I don't want to necessarily put it in the stock market. I don't want to buy bonds. I don't want to buy art. I don't want to buy real estate in Manhattan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that money and I'm going to put it into land because it's finite. But the downside of this is now the prices of land have gone up way beyond what we would call the utility price. The utility price is how much money can you make farming that land, raising corn, raising soybeans. Well, many people that are holding their money in land don't actually care. What they want is the fact that that's a finite asset that's going to hold value. Well, that's been true all the way up until now, where there's an analog that you can say, I want that finite nature that land has, and I'm going to hold the value of my money in Bitcoin. I'm not saying this will happen really quickly, but it will happen at some point. And so this land right now, when people hold it, they have to pay property tax. They have to manage the land. They have to actually put seeds in the ground and grow it. And either they have tenants or they raise it themselves. They have liability. They have insurance. They have all these things that are constantly making land expensive to own and not preserving as much value as possible. And as more and more people realize, wait a second, I can get the value that you get from land. It's scarce, but I don't have to pay all these other fees. Then they're going to start holding their value in Bitcoin. And it will make the price of land return to its utility value. How much is the land worth? Well, it's worth however much you can produce on it or whatever people want to do for recreation on it.
And so what are the practical milestones for that to actually come about? What things would have to happen in the interim to get to that point?
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of them happen, right? So it used to be that Bitcoin was not seen as collateral for other things. I mean, one of the reasons people hold their value in land is because then you can take that land and you can go out and get a loan and you can use that for other things. It's a way for you to be able to get leverage in other ways. Well, a couple of weeks ago, the Trump administration signed into law the fact that you can hold Bitcoin as collateral for a house loan. And I think that this is going to increase, that people are going to be able to use the value of their Bitcoin as collateral. And that's going to make it so, actually the value of holding it in land isn't quite as valuable. I also think that, just mass adoption right now, the way adoption is occurring, the way most of the Bitcoin are being bought are through ETFs. So people are buying it in their stock portfolios, or they're buying it as treasury assets. So there are a bunch of companies that are saying hey, if we hold all of our millions or billions of dollars in dollars, then that's going down. The value of that money is going down. But if we were to hold that money instead in Bitcoin, well, then it goes up. But as more and more people, regular people like you and me, decide, hey, I want to buy Bitcoin, that's what drives the price much, much faster, because there's many more people. They don't have the ability to go make large scale deals in what are called over-the-counter transactions. So I think as the price appreciates, as the banking system begins to adopt Bitcoin as collateral, and time will make it so that this happens.
And why use the word demonetize versus saying something like Bitcoin is bearish farmland or something like that?
Oh, that's a fair question. I mean, I think the idea of demonetizing is that land has been monetized. It has been turned into a form of money, and that is what is creating the premium on that money. Bearish is a fair term, right? Because you're describing, I think the price of it will go down. But what I'm saying is it will be treated less as a bearer asset, as a way to store currency. And by demonetizing it, once it's demonetized, it will hit a point where you won't see these giant bear and bull cycles, which has for a long time just been a bull cycle. That, in my perception, it can't go on forever if there's another asset that can hold the same weight that land can.
Yeah. And that is where your message is really resonating with me. Like, the prices being paid for ag land right now, just to me, are crazy. And especially when you talk to a lot of outside investors that are like, oh, this is the best investment ever. Man, it sure feels unsustainable to me because of the lack of underlying fundamentals behind it, which also has been some of my challenge with Bitcoin. And I guess one question I have is, and this may be the wrong framing, so redirect me from the get-go if you can, check my assumptions here, but like, investing in Bitcoin as opposed to like a cryptocurrency ETF feels like I'm putting all my eggs in one basket, and it feels less risky just to invest in like an ETF of cryptocurrency, which I'm not asking you to tell me is bad, but to tell me why Bitcoin specifically is what we're talking about and not just all these other various coins that are coming out.
What is brilliant about Bitcoin is that immaculate conception that we talked about before. There is no CEO. There's no group of guys that got together and said, hey, everybody, we've created a new coin and it does this creative thing, like Ethereum, for example. With Ethereum, there's a group of people that they can decide, hey, that transaction that went on between Tim and Vance, we didn't like that transaction. We're going to reverse it. Something bad happened. We're going to go through and we're going to change it. As soon as they did that, they showed that they, a group of people, control Ethereum. With Bitcoin, it doesn't have that aspect. No one controls it. It is trustless. They call it money for enemies. And it's that there's nobody that can get in there, no matter how much they try, no matter how much energy they garner, no matter how many nodes they put into the system, they can't override the system. And so when you are trusting an ETF or a basket of cryptocurrencies, or even you have somebody else go out and buy that Bitcoin for you, there is somebody else that's controlling that investment. And it is not the system of Bitcoin itself. It's a group of CEOs. It's a group of people that said, hey, we're going to publish this coin. And by the way, we're going to keep 30% for ourselves. And then you all are going to have to pay whatever the retail price is for it. And then as much as that goes up, we instantly have that amount of money. Bitcoin doesn't have that, which is why Satoshi having that wallet with 1.2 million Bitcoin in it, but never having touched it, is so amazing, because he started a system. He built up a huge amount of wealth. Presumably he has some other wallet that has Bitcoin in it, but he walked away. He didn't stay in control of it. He didn't say, I'm the Steve Jobs of this. Everybody listen to me. Instead, the system itself propagates itself, which makes it very, very different from all of the other cryptocurrencies. And in fact, I often say, if you hear somebody start talking positively about cryptocurrencies, they usually have some game they're playing, some benefit that they're getting from you believing in their particular coin or their particular flavor of this. Whereas if somebody's out there talking about Bitcoin, they're talking about a system, a fundamental system that certainly I benefit if more people demand it. But other than that, I don't get to play games with it in the way that you can with these other cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, that's very clarifying for me, because I do look at it whenever anyone's super excited about any cryptocurrency. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, they got in early, and of course they want, pump up the price by everyone else get involved. But it sounds like for you, it's really about a vote for a future that you see and are excited about. It's getting other people to see the vision you have for the future of currency.
Absolutely. And I mean, when I say these things, it is so foreign to people. And it was in 2014 when I was in small coffee shops talking about the inflation. But even now, like if you don't like war, you have nothing you can do to stop your government from printing money and paying for the industrial complex to fly to another place and drop bombs on them, because they have infinite money, because they can always print money and steal the value of your savings account. But if we are on a Bitcoin system and the world will only accept Bitcoin as payment, well then, unless you can convince your citizens that they want to pay their taxes and they want Bitcoin going towards paying for a war machine, you are going to severely limit the government's ability to create weapons out of our own bank accounts. It will radically change how things get priced in the market, because you won't have a government being able to say, we want to do these things. And so the price of your eggs and your steak and your bread and all of these things are going to go up forever. So Bitcoin to me is a vote for a system that frees us from the whims of whoever is in charge of us.
So if I own a lot of farmland because I'm a farmer, what should I do with this new information? Hedge with Bitcoin, or is there something more nuanced than that?
The most practical advice I can ever give anyone is just go buy a small amount of Bitcoin on an exchange and then get it off of the exchange into a wallet. If you do those two steps, go buy it and then get a wallet. You can use a Trezor wallet, which is probably the most user-friendly wallet, or you could use a cold card, which is probably the industry grade, like most hardcore standard. Once you do those two steps, your fundamental understanding of what Bitcoin is will transform from being something that's far away, something that you can't really understand, it's a little bit nebulous, to a very concrete thing. And you may have to watch some YouTube videos, you may have to get on AI and be like, how do I do this? But you will learn. And so spending $100 or $500 on Bitcoin and just saying, this is going to be my education. Once you get done with that education, I know almost no one that has started buying Bitcoin that didn't continue to find ways to say, oh, okay, this is something I can invest into, even if they're not investing very much. I know a lot of people that just say, hey, every day I'm going to make a buy for $2 a day of Bitcoin. I'm going to convert $2 into Bitcoin. And over the span of a year, that ends up being several $100s, and they are accumulating without it ever really being anything that they feel. And then when they have the opportunity to buy more, they end up buying it in larger tranches.
Tell us about Farm Credit and you talking about all this to Farm Credit, which I would imagine if they were to buy into it would feel very, very troublesome for their business model.
Well, so a few years ago, I was invited to give a talk to the Farm Credit boards of directors from all over the country. And they asked me to give this talk that's probably one of my most popular talks, called The Edge of Chaos, which is really about where do new ideas come from? How do you anticipate new things that are coming? And a few months before, they said, hey, what technology are you going to talk about, that's like the edge of chaos? And I was like, well, how edgy do you want me to be? And they were like, edgy, push the envelope. And so I talked about AI, and this is before Grok or ChatGPT had come out. So people really didn't know or understand it very well. And I talked about Bitcoin. And I remember telling my friends, I was like, well, this will be the last time Farm Credit invites me to do anything, but they asked me to push the envelope. So I came and I gave a talk, and in the talk, I explained Bitcoin, and it really pushed me to think about it in a very different way. In fact, it was in leading up to this talk that I had that realization that Bitcoin would eventually demonetize land. And when I brought this up with the group, they had excellent questions. And these were board members from all over the country, from California to Maine to, all throughout. And I actually walked off the stage and took questions for hours afterwards of various board members asking about it. It was the best experience that I'd ever had with Bitcoin, but I did still think they're never going to talk with me again. And then about a year ago now, I was approached by the FCS Financial, which is the Missouri Farm Credit Bank. And they said, hey, we're interested in potentially having you be an outside board of directors member. And I thought this was hilarious. I thought this was one of those things that was like, oh, clearly they haven't listened to my podcast and they might not have been at that speech. This is funny, but sure, I'll do it. And I went through the first two interviews. They did 2 interviews online, and the people were so nice and everything was just very open. And so then they were like, hey, we'd like you to come down to Missouri, to Jeff City, and interview. And I thought, I really don't think that this is going to be a good fit for me. Like, I already was on a bank board, just like they're old fashioned. I don't know. So I go to this meeting and I almost didn't even wear a jacket, a sports coat, right? I was like, what is this going to even be? But I did at the last minute. I walk in, I sit down, and it is a board of 14 people. And it was the most hardcore interview I've ever done in my life. They were asking me the most intense questions about my past experience, about my belief about agriculture. They asked me all about Bitcoin. I told them about demonetizing land. It turns out a few of the people had been in that talk that I had given, and a few people had listened to the podcast. And it was very clear to me, and still is now, they don't agree with me. Like they are not on board with Bitcoin. In fact, they were like, hey, if this happens, all of our collateral would not be worth what we're doing. Like, this is not what we agree with. But to their credit, they were like, but you're the one that's thinking about things differently. And we would like you to keep pushing us. And so they ultimately offered me one of 2 outside board member positions. And I had never had such an intense and incredible experience interviewing, where I was like, clearly the only way you could ask questions at this level of sophistication is if you yourself are paying attention, you are intelligent, and you are knowing what's going on in the world. And so I was like, I could do no better than being on this board. I have no interest in telling them things they want to hear. They're clearly open to me telling them things they don't want to hear. And it has been the best experience of me participating in anything. It's really incredible. I have a whole new profound respect for the farm credit system after having gotten involved with this board.
Wow. The show is called Future of Agriculture, and certainly we take more of an optimistic view of the future, but I think it's really, really important to look at the risks as well. And when I think about what drives U.S. agriculture, 2 things. Number 1 is exports, and number 2 is farmland values. Like that's the sort of the engine that makes it all work. And there are certainly reasons to be alarmed by what might happen in a future with, demographic issues causing less global demand for agricultural products and something like demonetizing farmland. What does the future of agriculture look like in that situation where there's just less global demand for products and farmland is demonetized? I don't have an answer to that, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
The first thought that comes to mind, so most of my clients for legacy interviews are people in agriculture. And they come in and they talk about what they want for their farm, usually that they've passed down or tried to pass down. And one of the big problems that they have is there's usually 1 or 2 kids that wants the property. And then there's a couple of kids that's not what they're doing. And so for now, one of the solutions is, well, we just divide it up evenly and give them all 4 an even shake. Or we have one child that tries to buy out that land from the other ones. And there's challenges with that too. And I think something like Bitcoin is a way for people to be able to make investments into a finite asset that will allow them to be able to leave something to the children that are not going to stay in farming and still be able to keep the farmland together, so that whoever does keep it gets to have a large enough amount of land to be able to have something valuable. And then in the future, what's going to happen in terms of, technology and pricing and exports, nobody knows. But the people that will be the best prepared are the ones that are willing to be like you are, a white belt in jiu-jitsu. They're willing to go try something that's difficult and feels uncomfortable. But those are the people that will be the black belts in the new future. And so I guess if somebody's listening to the future of agriculture, they're in the exact right spot. They're figuring out what's going to go on, even if it makes them uncomfortable, and they have a chance to go get involved in it before other people do.
All right, last question. And I promise I will let you go. I don't know if you'd describe yourself this way, but I view you as someone who is an advocate for healthy conflict. And I wonder in this age of AI, where it is seemingly easy to avoid conflict at all costs and just hang out with our AIs that we've built to validate ourselves, where do we go for healthy conflict, and how do we make sure that stays an important part of a healthy society?
Man, that is an excellent question, because it goes along with the flaw that I see in AI is that it can't tell you no, right? Like robots can't tell you no unless the people that are controlling them say, hey, you're not allowed to get that information, or hey, but outside of that, whatever you tell it, it can't say no. And that's a power that most human beings have never experienced before. But I think ultimately it's a power that doesn't actually feel very good, because it's the ability of another person to agree with you when they have the opportunity, the ability to say no. If they agree with you and they can say no, that's when you know there's something of value there. And so that's the value of friendship, where you have people that are willing to tell you no or willing to disagree with you. That's the value of a marriage, where somebody's willing to say, like, no, like I view this other thing. And that conflict is what allows you to find a better path forward. And you won't get that with AI. And if you do, it's only because it's programmed in there and somebody could take it out in the blink of an eye. But what makes a human special in some ways is their ability to say no.
Humans, atoms, artificial intelligence, Bitcoin, farmland. This has been a unique and fascinating discussion. I want to thank Vance Crowe very much for being on the show. As you could probably gather from listening to that, we could have gone on a couple more hours, so we'll have to have him back on the show later. And I'd love to have your questions to do that. So if you have questions you wish I would have asked Vance, email them to me, tim@aggrad.com, or you could find both Vance and I on X, or you could find him on Nostr, apparently. Maybe I need to be on Nostr at some point. And really appreciate Vance being so open and having such independent thought about these things. That is something that in the age of AI, where we can have something that's constantly willing to think for us and constantly willing to feed us the answers we want, independent thought is more and more precious and rare. Thank you again to Vance. Thank all of you for your time and your attention. I don't take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.